From New York City for our viewers worldwide, I'm Matt Miller looking at new records across the board. The countdown to the Open starts right now. Coming up, stocks holding near a record as a major bear capitulates. Fed speak ramping up with limited data on the docket, and Nvidia results in focus as earnings season wraps up. We begin, though, with the big issue, stress testing the equity rally.
It's going to be a really big test because last week when you had kind of no data, the market was able to, or 2 weeks ago when you had no data, the market just sort of trended higher. You had a nice clean week. I think this time you have a 2-week window. It's right around month end. You know, the question I think is, with the market at an all-time high, do people kind of trim some risk and do you get a little chop, or is it everything's fine and dandy? If it's fine and dandy, I think you can kind of drift higher.
Joining us now to discuss is Aoifinn Devitt of Moneta and Kathy Jones of Charles Schwab. And, you know, that was Stuart Kaiser, but Michael Wilson also coming out and capitulating. When he did that last year, that marked the top of the market. Kathy, what do you think of, you know, S&P 5,300, Dow 40,000?
Well, it's pretty impressive in light of the rate hikes that we've had. But it has been, and our equity strategists do talk about how it's been led by kind of a narrow group. There's some broadening, but kind of a narrow group. So I guess, as the previous guest indicated, maybe this is a good test for whether it can carry on.
The narrowness has been a concern for a couple of years now, Aoifinn. Do you really see the broadening? Is that actually going to happen?
I already see evidence of the broadening, and we can see that with how the other sectors have actually picked up quite a bit year to date. We certainly still have the focus on the Magnificent Seven or the Fabulous Five or whatever number we're reducing them to. But certainly the other sectors, as well as other cap sizes, mid cap and small cap, are importantly seeing some action. And it's not just about the US anymore either. Finally, markets like the UK have followed suit and are now on a par with other developed markets. So we are seeing the broadening, but it's still quite concentrated in relative terms.
How confident do you feel? I mean, I'll ask you both, but Kathy, why don't you kick it off, in a recovery based on inflation coming down, on disinflation? Are we really seeing that now to the point where the Fed is going to be able to cut rates this year?
I do see that happening this year. We still have about 2 rate cuts penciled in for the end of the year. The recent data have indicated the disinflation trend appears to be, resuming after kind of stalling out a little bit. And the main drivers here, rents and a handful of other things, appear ready to show through the data. We know in real life that the rate of increase in rents is coming down, in fact, actually deflating in some cases. We're seeing home prices fall in certain parts of the country, and that should work its way through and allow the Fed to ease rates. And we're also seeing a slowdown in other types of activity. Those retail sales numbers are telling us consumer spending appears to be slowing down after a pretty robust start to the year. So second quarter is looking slower and inflation is looking lower. So we think that will open the door to some rate cuts later in the year.
Aoifinn, do you agree? I note Kathy has one rate cut penciled in for September, which seems perilously close to the election for Jay Powell and co.
There's certainly going to be a lot of political maneuvering around that time, and we'll see how the waters look, essentially. But I would agree completely with that yes, 2 rate cuts on the horizon now. There's been such much volatility, though, around that. It's been quite extraordinary to watch the volatility around rate expectations. I think at this point, the Fed knows that it's already restrictive. Staying higher for longer with inflation coming down is de facto restrictive. The transmission effect is still happening through the economy for both consumers and companies alike. Refinancings are coming, and we just don't know the extent of that pain. So I think expectations have been set now, such if they were not to fulfill them, and we've already seen that other central banks are taking their cue from inflation falling around the world. We saw that with Sweden, and probably the ECB is next. So I think they're going to take their cue from that to have at least 1 rate cut and probably 2.
Let's talk about more closely about the Fed speak that we're bracing for this week. Bloomberg's Michael McKee caught up with Atlanta Fed President Raphael Bostic earlier.
I do think that our new steady state is likely to be higher than what people have known over the last decade, maybe back to where we were in the 1990s and 2000s, but we'll just have to see.
All right, higher than the last decade is a pretty low bar, right? I wonder what you think of the consumer holding up in this environment, Kathy. I mean, we had bad retail sales when we got the CPI number out last week, or at least disappointing relative to what we were looking for. We've seen higher income consumers step down to Walmart, which is great for Walmart, but maybe doesn't say a lot of positive things about the U.S. economy. I mean, how does the U.S. consumer, so important for growth, look to you right now, Kathy?
Well, things look okay, but as you indicated, consumers at the lower end of the spectrum are feeling pain. We're seeing delinquencies on auto loans, we're seeing delinquencies on credit cards rise pretty sharply, and that's an indication that people who, at the lower end of the income spectrum are having some problems. Upper income folks are still doing okay and still spending, but the fact that they're stepping down means that they're probably getting a little bit concerned about where they are in their spending and need to address that. I think the big factor to watch is the labor market. When people have jobs, they tend to feel pretty good about spending money and taking out loans and buying things. If the labor market shows deterioration or even just a slowdown, that could probably mean slower consumer spending. So that's what I'm keeping the sharpest eye on right now, because it's really all about that income growth.
All right, let's get down to Michael McKee. I kind of missed that cue that he's with us. He's actually on Amelia Island, not here next to me on set as he normally is. And that's where you caught up with Bostic. What do you hear from Fed officials about the U.S. consumer? I mean, Kathy has also pointed out that the labor picture is softening a bit as well.
Well, Bostic said the labor picture is softening, but not as fast as they anticipated. The same story as we're seeing with inflation. And he talked about sort of two Americas. One, a lower income America that has spent through the extra money they got during the pandemic and is now living paycheck to paycheck or using their credit cards to continue spending, and they're cutting back. And then there's a whole group of people who either are on the wealthy end and get a lot of their money from asset price appreciation. They keep spending, or others who had still saved a lot and are spending. So it's kind of hard, he said, to get a reading on where consumer spending is going anytime in the near future. I asked him about the interest rate sensitive sectors of the economy, and he's had an interesting comment, Matt, I know you'll appreciate this, on auto sales, that we're back to where we used to be, he said. Instead of everybody going in and getting a zero price loan and picking out the car they want, you need to go around to dealers and negotiate again and try to get the best deal that you possibly can. So that was kind of an interesting take on how the consumer and interest rates are affecting at least one important sector of the economy.
That's the fun part of auto buying. Mike, what do you think about the effect of a rate cut on the political environment? I question usually when a call is out for a rate cut in September, but I mean, does it really matter if Powell cuts rates in September? Is that going to really have an effect, do they think, on the polls in November?
Well, it won't have an effect on the economy if they cut rates in September. It'll take longer to get into the economy. It might have an effect on psychology, and I'm sure that's what the Biden administration is hoping for. But at this point, we're still pricing out September, and November is seen as the first move. And I asked Raphael about this and whether Americans would feel anything different in the economy between now and then. And he said he didn't think so, that things are changing so slowly that, yes, inflation will be lower. Maybe we'll see a little bit less job creation and consumer spending pull back a little bit, but it won't be any kind of major shift in the economy. So it isn't going to be the economy that the administration is going to be able to count on in the election.
Michael McKee, thanks very much from Amelia Island for us this morning. Let's get back to Kathy Jones and Aoifinn Devitt. Aoifinn, let me ask you about the political picture. Do you think it has any read-through in markets? I mean, Republicans, some Republicans have suggested that optimism for Trump winning in November is one of the things that's blowing up the indexes right now.
It's so hard to say. I mean, I think what we've experienced before is that the effect of both domestic politics and international geopolitics is actually very muted in markets these days. maybe that's a sign of markets resilience. Maybe it's a sign that really, in effect, essentially both parties are somewhat tied in terms of what they could do. The tax cuts are already in effect. There's unlikely to be a rollback of that. We're seeing a convergence around some of the trade policies, perhaps more stark rhetoric from one side, but essentially very similar policies around protectionism and tariffs. So there's unlikely to be much of a change there. And on the fiscal side, we all know from the rising deficit that there is somewhat of a hamstrung situation there too. So how different can the picture be? I think one of the only sectors that really is looking at a very bifurcated future after the election would be renewable energy and anything tied to the green transition. That clearly could have a different picture. But as far as other politics and other sectors, AI, other areas like that, I don't see a big change in that. So there will be noise around the election. If there's uncertainty, there's definitely going to be more volatility, but I don't see a big effect on the economic outlook.
Well, I'm glad you point out even the protectionist bent of, both parties. It used to be, when I was a kid, Republicans were into free markets and Democrats were typically more protectionist, or at least that's what I thought at the time. It seems like now it doesn't matter which side of the aisle you are for higher tariffs. Kathy, is that having any effect on the market? I mean, does blocking out the competition help, for example, the U.S. stocks that make these things?
Yeah, it seems unlikely. Protectionism really never wins as a strategy over the long run. I think in the short run, it provides some safety and protection for some industries, but more importantly, we've had a lot of investment in certain industries, and so that they can compete domestically. But when it comes to, say, blocking Chinese imports, well, they can go via Mexico or some other conduit, and it may be good for Mexico. I don't know that it changes anything for us. So protectionism is never usually a good thing for the economy, and we'll see how it develops. As you say, both sides seems to be playing that game right now, but we'll just have to see how things play out. Everything is really in flux, I think, between now and the election, and particularly the deficit. That's the number one concern we hear from clients, is they're worried about the deficit. And will we extend the tax cuts? Will we have to roll some of them back? Will there be changes in the way spending is done on some of the entitlements? All that's really important, but we're not going to know that until after the election.
I wonder about the broadening out, not only of the successful stocks in the S&P 500, but the successful economies globally. Kathy, Aoifinn was mentioning that other economies are doing well now, as well as the U.S. How do you see that when you're looking at different markets to invest in?
Yeah, so we've seen, it looks like we're getting a little bit of a turnaround, say, in Europe and maybe the UK. Things are finally picking up after a pretty sluggish period of time. We're also getting, as Aoifinn mentioned, the rate cuts, which I think will be important to help ease some of the constraints on those economies. Interestingly, we're seeing a lot of growth still in the emerging markets, considering the strength of the dollar, the high interest rate. Some of those countries have been able to cut rates and stimulate economic growth. So the global economy is looking, somewhat more optimistic right now after, I would say, a fairly sluggish pace. In the bond market, we've actually seen some opportunities in the local currency emerging market bonds. We think that that's, for somebody who's willing to take some risk and ride the ups and downs, that might be a place to pick up some extra added yield and some added potential capital gains.
Aoifinn, what do you think? I mean, you pointed it out. Where do you see opportunity outside of the U.S., the most opportunity?
Yeah, we've been solidly focused on global investing for some time. We believe that kind of diversification is essential in a portfolio. It's been a very difficult position to hold as the dollar has been strong and as other markets have lagged. Now, do we see that turning necessarily very soon? Not necessarily. But however, we've seen the dollar slightly weaker, so that's probably going to bode well for at least international investing. We have been interested in Japan, perhaps not with the same euphoria as some other investors. We saw that it was overpriced. It was undervalued for some time, and now we can see that that's starting to rally. I'm very cautious on emerging markets, I'd say, because of some of that uncertainty around protectionism, tariffs, and China's emergence, even from their post-COVID slump. It's still happening in a kind of somewhat sporadic way. Europe, we like, but all of this will be very much a minority in terms of an overall equity allocation. We're still US dominant and just having that diversification around the edges.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us. Great talking to both of you. Aoifinn Devitt there from Moneta, Kathy Jones joining us from Schwab. Now, a look at some of the stocks moving ahead of the opening bell this morning. For that, we go to Abigail Doolittle. Abby?
Well, Matt, given the fact that we have the U.S. futures basically flat up ever so slightly, it is interesting to note that there are some outsized movers beneath the surface, including Norwegian Cruise Lines. They've essentially pre-announced the upside just moments ago, up about 4% in the pre-market. They've raised their fiscal year adjusted earnings to $142 from about $1.32 per share. So investors liking this news a lot. They're seeing strong demand and bookings. Johnson Controls, the building materials and technology materials company, up nearly 3%. This is Elliott, and this was, of course, a Bloomberg exclusive. Elliott said to have to build a $1 billion plus stake in the company, which has lagged its peers, according to many people familiar with the matter. This is the case. And now this puts Elliott in the top 10 investors. And then finally, Nvidia. What would a day be without Nvidia? Up 1.3%. Of course, it will be one of the big events this week, Matt. They report Wednesday evening after the bell. Barclays is boosting their price target ahead of time, taking a positive stake on the company, basically saying that the data center revenue will be ahead of what the street is expecting.
All right, very interesting what to watch on Wednesday from Abigail Doolittle. Thanks very much for that. Coming up, the world reacts to the death of Iran's president.
Geopolitical risk is elevated still further by these. It's going to make Iran essentially double down on its own stance, I think, for the next couple of months.
We'll take a look at the global impact next. This is Bloomberg.
Of course, geopolitical risk is elevated still further by these deaths, but that the impact could be quite limited. It's going to make Iran essentially double down on its own stance, I think, for the next couple of months anyway. That 50-day bogey in terms of a new election is very important, and they're going to go out of their way to show that it's basically business as usual.
Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi, along with his foreign minister, the two have been killed in a helicopter crash. State media announced those deaths earlier today after the wreckage was found in a mountainous northwest region of the country. Raisi was considered by many to be the front runner to be the next supreme leader of Iran. For more, we're joined by Bloomberg senior editor Bobby Ghosh. Bobby, first off, what do we know about the circumstances surrounding this helicopter crash? You immediately, the mind immediately jumps to conspiracies. On the other hand, I've also read that the equipment, including the helicopter itself, were old and maybe in disrepair.
It was a very old helicopter, 1975, built, I believe, American make. A lot of Iran's flying planes as well as helicopters are very old. Remember, this is a country that has been under economic sanctions for a very long time and has not been allowed to buy newer equipment. It was a 3-helicopter convoy, we understand, traveling through dense fog in a mountainous territory. So accidents, given those two circumstances, accidents will happen. We've heard nothing yet to suggest anything other than that. The Iranian regime is extraordinarily paranoid and very quickly jumps to theories and conspiracy theories whenever the opportunity arises. We have not seen much of that as yet. We can ignore for the moment what's going on social media until we see something more concrete to suggest that there was a human hand involved. I think this is an accident, and we have to see it that way.
What is the potential for change here? I mean, this president was extremely conservative. He had been linked to numerous mass executions. He was widely seen as the potential successor to the current Ayatollah. I mean, does this leave room for a change towards a more liberal ruler, or does it reinforce the sort of conservative bent that we've seen Iran going to?
Well, you always hope when there's a change of leadership in Iran that it will be a more liberal person. But the fact is there isn't much there. There's not a great deal of genuine liberal representation in the higher echelons of the regime. As you say, Raisi was one of the favorites to be successor to Supreme Leader Khamenei. He was practically handpicked. It's a very similar CV. He even affected a very similar look, and glasses and everything. So that would be a big blow for Ayatollah Khamenei. He now has to find another protege who he can bring up to the presidency. He has 50 days to do that. I suppose you could say there is a tiny sliver of hope that the folks who are, I really hesitate to use the word liberal, but less hardline. Let's go with that. Folks who are less hardline than Raisi were might be able to put up a candidate for the election. But we saw in the last election that the regime does not tolerate anybody getting in its way. Any candidate that they don't like is disqualified and basically prevented from running a free and fair campaign. The last election campaign was had the lowest turnout, and that sort of really hurt the credibility and of the regime. They'll be really worried about that. They have an election in 50 days, and let's say only 35% of Iranians show up. That is a real crisis of credibility that the regime does not want to deal with right now.
So what does it mean then? What does this death or these deaths mean for the tinderbox that is the Middle East relationships, Iran's relationship with Saudi Arabia, the Israel-Hamas war, and their relationship with each other as well?
So this regime has never come to this fork in the road before. They've never had a sitting president die in office. It's never happened. So what they will want to do above all else now is project stability, project continuity. Everybody in the regime rallies behind the flag, rallies behind the supreme leader, and the message they will send to the world, or want to anyway, is that nothing has changed. Foreign policy doesn't change, domestic policy doesn't change. Right. It's worth remembering that, of course, it is Ayatollah Khamenei who pulls all the strings in Iran. So the person who is the president is frankly not that important. It's important that Ayatollah Khamenei picks the person he wants, and then whoever that is, and this time it'll be somebody very likely out of the blue, whoever that is will faithfully follow through on the policies of Ayatollah Khamenei. And those policies are not going to change.
All right, Bobby, thanks so much for joining us. Bloomberg's Bobby Ghosh there. Coming up, the morning calls. And then later we'll talk to David Dindy of Atomic Capital around the opening bell. This is Bloomberg. Time now for our morning calls. Look at some of the analyst recommendations on Wall Street this morning. First up, Morgan Stanley upgrades Micron to an equal weight, pointing to strengthening demand for AI-related products. Next up, Barclays raising its Nvidia price target to $1,100 ahead of earnings. Abby pointed out those are on Wednesday night. That's all for now. This is Bloomberg. This is the countdown to the open. I'm Matt Miller. Moments away from the start of trading, we see futures little change, but the index is at all-time highs on the Dow, on the NASDAQ 100, on the S&P 500. So we'll see if we hold at these levels, and we'll see if we can continue to push higher in the face of Fed rate cuts that are expected to be, well, not as numerous. Let's check out some of the other action here at the opening bell. You can see the euro a little changed at 108.64. The 10-year yield at 4.44, so a little lower than that 2-year yield, I believe, right now. A little bit of an inversion. NYMEX crude off 0.7% at $79.50 a barrel. One stock to watch at the open is Norwegian Cruz. The company boosted its adjusted EPS forecast, citing strong demand. Let's go over to Abigail Doolittle for more on the Norwegian Cruise Lines.
And this means that investors are sending this stock to its best day right now, at least in about a month or so, Matt, because this is effectively a bullish pre-announce, a positive think clearly. They now see adjusted earnings of about $1.42 per share versus what they had seen before, $1.32. They're talking about strong demand and bookings. Now, I think a piece of this is that while their last quarter was good, it was a little bit less spectacular than some of the other cruise line companies. And while the stock is down about 75% from its pre-pandemic highs over the last year into that quarter, it had been up nearly 60%. So maybe price to perfection to some degree. There's also a 7.3% short interest on this stock. So I think that some of today's now 5.8% move higher, that could be a little bit of a short squeeze. But again, these booking trends, the demand trends, very positive, allowing Norwegian Cruise Line to up its guidance. And in sympathy, we have Royal Caribbean higher, also Carnival. Viking now getting a bid as well. And that stock, of course, IPO just a few weeks ago, up more than 20% since that IPO. So this cruise line industry really still doing quite well. Matt, you could not get me to go on one, though. I don't think. Maybe Viking, though. Maybe
I have not. Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I haven't ever been on a cruise. I looked around because I thought, you know, single price tag for one holiday, but yeah, no, I don't think it's for me. Abigail Doolittle, thanks very much for that. Turning to the big stock story of the week, of the year, of the decade. Shares of Nvidia moving higher with a pair of analysts raising their price targets ahead of Wednesday's results. Bloomberg's Simone Foxman joins us here on set with more. So, Simone, Nvidia is going to show us what's there in terms of demand for these AI chips that have been driving the stock for the last couple of years.
Yeah, and the question mark here for analysts has really been, will people stop buying these Nvidia chips, companies stop buying these Nvidia chips at the same pace as they await the rollout of these new Blackwell AI chips that they're supposed to see in the second half of the year. There had been some concern that we wouldn't see that demand continue apace, but the likes of Barclays, Susquehanna, and frankly, half a dozen analysts over the last 10 days or so have come out, raised their price targets, mainly because they say this demand remains to be strong. So we checked in with Thomas O'Malley. Barclays said these concerns seemingly overblown. He says he sees over $1 billion in upside in data center revenue in the first quarter. So that's in the months since their fourth quarter ended in January that they're going to report on Wednesday. And he sees that segment revenue at about $23 billion in comparison to the $21 billion that the street consensus had. Even at $21 billion, you're looking at about a 400% increase in revenue on a year-on-year basis. So this is what's driving the expectations across the street that we're going to get a beat and a raise in these all-important earnings on Wednesday. Remember, Nvidia accounting for about 5% of the market value of the S&P 500. So that is why this story is not just important to this name, but the broader market, Matt.
All right, Simone, thanks very much. Simone Foxman there talking to us about Nvidia, those earnings out after the bell on Wednesday. Joining us now is David Dindy. He's the co-founder and CEO of Atomic Invest. Really leapt into the news, or at least into my readings of the news after the collapse of SVB. And David, that's because you provide a platform for companies to do their daily cash flow operations through a broker-dealer rather than a bank like SVB, right?
That's correct.
So how has business been since that collapse? I mean, at the time we thought, okay, this is a great solution to the problem of, what we saw at a few regional banks at the time. Have you been building a bigger and bigger book?
We have. We've been growing in two dimensions. The first is that we've onboarded a series of new companies that are providing cash management solutions to businesses across the world. One partnership to highlight, for instance, is with Bluevine, the company that provides small businesses in the U.S., about 500,000 of them, access to platforms that offer digital banking solutions. And at the same time, we've grown just because of the demand for fixed income. We've seen trading volumes rise to over $13 billion on an annualized basis.
Talk to me about this product, because whenever I read about Atomic, you're mentioned kind of in the same breath as Robinhood, but the fact that you're the anti-Robinhood, what is that supposed to mean?
Well, our thesis at Atomic is that the future of investing is embedded and ubiquitous. Think about how you access the stock market today. You've probably opened an account with Schwab or with Robinhood, and they're providing these services to you directly through their own brand. But what we do is we partner with everyday platforms that you use, such as your banking app, perhaps your social media app, or the digital wallets on your phone, who, in our opinion, are perfectly positioned to be able to offer you access to the stock market because you use them on a regular basis. And so we help them build their own versions of Schwab and offer their own versions of Robinhood within their products.
So these are two business lines, David, that are growing for you. What are the constraints? Are interest rates painful right now? I mean, are financial conditions feeling tight to you?
As a matter of fact, it's the opposite as what you'd assume. The interest rates being high today are actually quite favorable for our business because there's been a rush of popularity of fixed income, treasury bills, corporate bonds, and the like. The challenge in the ecosystem is that trading fixed income assets is still quite difficult for the most part, and providing retail investors access to them is quite difficult. And so what we decided to do is to essentially make it much easier by providing technology that allows us to fractionalize fixed income exposure and offer that to retail investors so that they can trade fixed income the same way that they would trade stocks today.
You know, I'm pretty focused on, because we're going to talk to a couple of other guests about, direct lending versus syndicated loans, Basel III endgame rules in terms of the amount of cushion banks need to hold. How does a Basel III result affect your business, if at all?
It doesn't, because we're regulated as a broker-dealer. And so we don't loan out customers' assets, at least unless they ask us to. And we don't treat those assets as though they're on our balance sheet in that respect. And so we're regulated differently. Customers don't have to worry about liquidity constraints on our side, considering the fact that they own their assets directly.
What I meant, though, is that, last year talking about this, Jamie Dimon said that non-bank rivals are going to be dancing in the streets. Now, I think he was talking about private credit. But if new, tougher regulations make it harder for the big banks to do business, are you a beneficiary of that?
We are. Well, I'd say on the one hand, we still operate in a manner that is consistent both with brokerage regulations and banking regulations. But at the same time, we have technology that allows us to service a broader range of consumers and customers and to have policies from an AML perspective and from a compliance perspective that allow us to do this at scale. And so as big banks are retreating, as regional banks are retreating from the space, we are stepping in with a model that we feel is more advanced and proper for what fintech companies and the ecosystem broadly needs at this point in time.
What about your access to capital as you continue to expand, David? What are your options right now, or do you need financing?
We don't need financing at the moment. As a matter of fact, we did close an additional round just late last year, led by companies like Brewer Lane, with other investors like Intuit and Samsung that see us as a strategic opportunity for them. And so at this point in time, we're well positioned to continue doing what we are doing today.
I'm always, when I talk to private company founders, asking the IPO question, because that's what gets the big headlines on the Bloomberg. But is that in your future, do you think? Would you be a publicly traded company?
Well, I think it's feasible. And ultimately, our mission is to bring wealth and make wealth accessible to every single human being. And I see it as something which will require us to eventually build towards becoming a public company. But I'd say at this point in time, we're just focused on where we are today and focused on building the best product and making these services available to a broad set of investors.
Got it. Great talking to you, David. Thanks so much for joining us on The Open this morning. David Dindy, their co-founder and CEO of Atomic Invest. Coming up, Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Horder joins us with Republican Senators Ted Cruz of Texas and Katie Britt of Alabama. This is Bloomberg.
studio. I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and joining me now are Republican Senators Ted Cruz of Texas and Katie Britt of Alabama. Thank you both for joining Bloomberg Television here in New York.
Thanks for having us.
You're out with a joint op-ed this morning in the Wall Street Journal. The title of it will protect both life and IVF. You're announcing a bill today through this legislation that would require as a condition, your words, of receiving federal Medicaid funding that states don't prohibit IVF. Now, concerns about IVF stemmed, really, Senator Britt, from your state of Alabama.
Absolutely.
The Supreme Court came out. They said that these embryos in IVF, they are considered children under the Wrongful Death of a Minor Act. And then the Alabama legislator moved to pass a bill that would protect IVF. So why is a national bill needed if the legislator just acted on behalf of basically telling the Supreme Court in Alabama that's wrong and this is not where the American people are?
Unfortunately, we've seen a number of people try to fearmonger on this very issue. And so Ted and I came together, and we believe this effort should be bipartisan to make sure that every parent across the country who wants to bring life into this world and maybe struggling with infertility or others, but wants to use IVF to create the miracle of life, bring it into the world, has a certainty that that's going to be available to them. And so we're excited about it and believe that it's something we can move forward quickly.
Senator Cruz, then why wouldn't Republicans sign up for Senator Duckworth's bill earlier this year, which then actually would have protected what happened in Alabama?
Well, because that bill's a very different bill. That bill really seeks to backdoor in broader abortion legislation, which is where the Democrats are, but that's not IVF. Our bill is very simple and it's very focused, and it is designed to protect IVF. IVF is miraculous medical technology. It enables millions of parents to have children, to be moms, to be dads. 2% of live births in America right now today come from IVF. It's incredible. And both Katie and I agree that IVF is incredibly pro-family, that we should be standing and helping parents who want to raise kids. And what happened when the Alabama Supreme Court decision came out, there was a lot of confusion, there was a lot of fear, there was a lot of misunderstanding, and people did not want anything to threaten IVF. I agree with that. Katie agrees with that. And so we came together and said, let's draft a simple, straightforward federal bill that creates a federal right, that you as a parent have a right to have access to IVF. If you want to have a child and you need medical assistance to do so, that should be your right. This is a bill, I think, that should be overwhelmingly bipartisan. The Senate should pass this bill 100-0. We'll see if they do or not, but on the merits, that's what should happen.
Senator Duckworth's bill, though, talked about and clearly asserts that this is about, quote, assisted reproductive technology and insurers' ability to cover those procedures. So in that case, do you guys think you can get a bipartisan legislation? Why not just work with Senator Duckworth?
Well, it depends. The way the Duckworth bill is written, it's very broad. There's a reason that no Republicans supported it, because it was ostensibly about IVF, but when it was written to give the federal government authority over abortion, potentially to strike down laws governing abortion in states all across the country. And that, I get that's the Democrats' agenda. And unfortunately...
Well, why not have bipartisanship on both? Because overwhelmingly, Americans want IVF, but overwhelmingly, and you come from states that have very restrictive abortion policies, even majority of Republicans think abortion should be able to happen, rape, incest, and life of the mother. That's not true of both your states.
Well, listen, abortion is an issue that there are sharp disagreements. People of good faith and good morals disagree. And it's why the Supreme Court has said this is a question for the states, and every state decides it differently. And if you look at our Constitution, that's the way we decide really difficult issues of public policy, is we leave it to the voters, and that reflects and respects democracy. IVF is very different. Nearly 90% of Americans believe IVF should be protected. And so what we're trying to say is, look, let's find an area of common ground. We're not going to find complete agreement among all 100 senators on abortion. We're just not. People have different views. That's the beauty of a democracy, that we can have different views. But on IVF, we ought to be able to unify everybody. We ought to be able to get Republicans and Democrats together and say this technology, enabling people to be parents, is wonderful technology, and it is pro-family. So There are issues on which we disagree, but this is one where we can find common ground. I very much hope.
And I hope so too. I mean, we actually wrote this in that way so that it would be very measured and simple and to the point, protecting IVF, protecting families' ability to bring life into this world. And we both have talked to a number of friends and family members and others, constituents, that tell us their story about being able to bring a child into this world through IVF. And so making sure that we protect that in a way that protects religious freedom and liberty and families and others, I think, is critically important. And that's what we've done here, and we hope to gain some momentum on it.
I guess some of the concerns from some hard right members of your party would be, is an IVF embryo considered life at conception?
Well, look, I can tell you that there is unanimity. I believe all 100 senators support IVF. I don't know a single senator that does not. I don't know a single Republican that does not. I don't know a single Democrat that does not. We ought to be able to find real agreement on a question like IVF. You know, you talk about it, as Katie mentioned, she and I both have dear friends who had their children through IVF, and they're wonderful parents. They love their daughters, their sons. That's an amazing thing. You know, you look at, since the development of IVF, there have been over 8 million babies born through IVF. That is a fantastic thing, and so many families have been brought joy that we ought to be able to find agreement, and I think we will. I hope we will.
But in the discussion of IVF, abortion comes up, and majority of Americans are on the side of at least abortion should be allowed, especially in certain cases of rape, incest, life of the mother. So with that in mind, going into this election season, how do you think about abortion? Because that, for Democrats, is going to be one of the main rallying cries to get voters out, as well as tapping funding.
I think it also should be for Republicans. I mean, Anne Marie, when you say that, I think the majority of Americans also believe you should not be able to take the life of a child the moment before the child is born.
Should there be a federal ban then?
Yet we saw Democrats vote just the last Congress to be able to do that. I mean, when you talk to people, when you talk about a child in a woman's womb at 39 weeks and actually aborting that baby, the majority of Americans agree that shouldn't be able to happen on American soil. So the problem is the Democrats are trying to deflect by how extreme they are in this position, and I think we're going to keep coming back to it, and I think we're where Americans are.
But if you say the Democrats are extreme in that position, and you want to have this IVF bill, and you think Duckworth potentially was too far on the margins coming into abortion, then would you be open to a bipartisanship bill when it comes to things like rape, incest, life of the mother?
So what I would say is today's Democrat position in the Senate is incredibly extreme, what Katie just told you. Every single Democrat in the Senate supports unlimited abortion, partial birth abortion,
I
literally.
don't think that's true.
But it is true.
Abortion,
So Anne Marie, it actually is true because they all voted for it.
They
that
did.
we had a bill last Congress that would strike down every limitation in the country and that would legalize abortion literally until the moment of birth. That is such an extreme position. 9% of Americans agree with it.
If you look at CDC data, though, there are not abortions in America.
Okay, but every Democrat supports
there
them.
actually are.
There are late-term abortions, and every single Democrat voted.
In extreme circumstances, though.
But every single Democrat supported it, and 91% of Americans disagree with that. The vast majority of people who consider themselves pro-choice say, listen, late-term abortion in the 39th or 40th week, that is barbaric, and that's the position of every single Democrat, which is why they don't want to talk about their position. What they want to do instead is scaremonger on IVF. They want to suggest those mean Republicans want to take away IVF. Well, let's have an area of complete agreement. Let's make clear IVF is fully protected by federal law. And
I think Democrats agree with you on there. And I would push back on them who say all of them want abortion till
but that is how they voted.
But
I mean, at the end of the day,
way.
what you vote for matters.
And they did vote that way, and that's the thing. I just had the Secretary of HHS in front of us at an appropriations hearing, and I asked him about this administration not putting the Hyde Amendment in their budget request, something that's been bipartisan for years, and moving that forward. And then I had actually talked to a woman who performed one of these abortions at 39 weeks right before walking into there. She told me about how barbaric that is, about delivering the baby breech, about putting a knife up that baby's spine, opening it up, pulling out the brains, collapsing the skull, pushing that baby out. So it actually does happen. And unfortunately, every Democrat voted to continue to allow that to happen. And the thing is we have a duty to continue to talk about that. We're one of 8 countries on the entire planet that allows for that.
So are you both calling for a national ban?
Well, there is an existing law that bans federal partial birth abortion. It's the Democrats that are calling for changing the federal law to legalize partial birth abortion. They voted for striking down every restriction. But understand here, listen, we're not going to this morning resolve all the disagreements on abortion. People have very strong, good faith views from places of deep emotion and personal experience. That's part of the beauty of democracy, that's part of the genius of the framers, is they recognize when there's questions we have disagreements about, let the voters decide, and you would expect the state of New York to have a different resolution than the state of Texas or the state of Alabama, and we've got 50 states. But what we can do is say, are there issues where we have agreement? And IVF is one of them. This bill is designed to protect something that is incredibly important, to give comfort to parents and to those who desperately want to be parents, who are scared and they're picking up the newspapers or watching on TV politicians saying someone's going to take away IVF. Well, this bill will make clear, it will be enshrined in federal law, you have a right to access to this technology.
It's also very political going to election. And actually, one of your staffers said that to the Washington Examiner. And as we head into the election, Senator Britt, I have to ask you, since you're with us, your name continuously be floated as this potential VP pick for former President Donald Trump. What is the current dialogue between you and the Trump campaign?
Look, I am working diligently on behalf of the people of Alabama in the United States Senate. We have a lot of work to do there, and I'm eager to continue that work, and I'm proud to be a part of it. There's no doubt that the American people want Donald Trump back in the White House. I mean, we are seeing that at every single poll because people want a secure border, they want safe streets, they want stable prices, and then that's what he's going to bring to the White House. So I'm going to continue to work diligently alongside Ted to bring common sense solutions to the problems facing our country, and certainly honored to be able to do that.
But if he calls, you accept?
Listen, I am sure he has a long list, many of which are our colleagues, and we're rooting for them for sure. Bottom line is we're going to all do everything that we can to get Donald Trump back in the White House and also take back the Senate, because the fate of our nation is at stake, and we believe that that's worth fighting for.
Republican Senator Ted Cruz, Senator Katie Britt of Alabama, thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Anne-Marie, thanks very much for that. Now, roughly 56 minutes into the hour, 26 minutes into the trading session. Let's take a look at where markets are after they hit record highs on the Friday trade. You've got the Russell 2000 in here because we saw a little bit of a broadening out, but the Dow is one I would look at here. We were above 40,000 on Friday. We've dropped back below right now and are just hovering around that level. The NASDAQ 100 hit a new record, as did the S&P 500, 53.21, the level there. Stay tuned for my interview with Richard Farley of Kramer, Levin, Naftalis at 10:10.